The Indiana Fever, Kelsey, Money Mitch, put him in a ditch. Lexie Hole taking over.
The arena lights burned with a quiet intensity, casting long shadows across the court as the Indiana Fever stepped onto the hardwood, without their brightest star. Caitlin Clark, the rookie sensation whose every dribble had become a headline, was sidelined, injured, the heart of a team seemingly gutted. And yet, the story that would unfold next wasn't about her.
The Washington Mystics in the first game of the Commissioner's Cup, 85-76.
Absence. It was about defiance. It was about grit. It was about a team that, after being pushed down, dragged through the mud, and ridiculed in preseason humiliation, refused to stay there. The Washington Mystics had thought they broke the Fever. Back. In the preseason, the bullying was palpable, an almost theatrical performance of dominance as the Mystics towered over Indiana, both literally and metaphorically. One moment stood out like a scar that never healed. Sophie Cunningham, targeted and taunted, as the Mystics used physicality not just as strategy, but as intimidation. That night, the Mystics didn't just win a game, they tried to send a message. Indiana didn't belong here, and the league seemed to agree. With Clark's injury, the Fever were written off. Pundits, fans, and even neutral observers looked at the roster and shrugged. What now? Without their prodigy, Indiana was seen as defanged, declawed, and destined to fall apart. But that was a fatal miscalculation. Because sometimes, when the spotlight fades from one star, it lights the path for others. Enter Lexie Hull. On this night, Hull played not with the poise of a role player, but with the fury of a warrior long overlooked. Her movements were sharp, her drives decisive, and her defense relentless. With every possession, she clawed back the respect her team had been denied. There was no hesitation in her step, only fire. And across from her, Kelsey Mitchell, a seasoned scorer whose game often simmers quietly until it explodes, began to orchestrate a comeback that wasn't just strategic, it was personal. Mitchell has always been a bucket. But tonight she was more than that. She was vengeance in motion. Every shot she made seemed to echo the doubt that had clouded the Fever's name. She wove through defenders with surgical precision, pulling up for mid-range daggers and sinking. Threes with the cool confidence of someone who'd had enough of the noise. This wasn't about winning a game anymore. This was about making a statement. Every bucket was a rebuttal to the narrative that Indiana was finished. As the game unfolded, the Fever didn't just fight, they hunted. Their defense, often criticized for its inconsistency, was suddenly suffocating. They rotated with urgency, crashed the boards like it was life or death, and hounded the Mystics into bad shots. It wasn't chaos, it was calculated retaliation. You could feel the shift not just in the scoreboard, but in the rhythm of the arena. The crowd, sensing the improbable brewing before their eyes, roared louder with every stop, every steal, every fast break finish. And what of the Mystics? The bullies of preseason, the ones who had mocked and manhandled this very team just weeks ago? They looked stunned, disoriented. For all their swagger, they had no answer for Indiana's newfound rage. It was as if they had expected the same fragile Fever from before, crushed spirits and second-guessing. What they got instead was a machine powered by revenge. The Fever bench was electric. Every time Lexie Hull made a play, the sideline erupted. Teammates who had been background characters in the league's media circus now found themselves front and center. Nalissa Smith, Temi Fagbenley, Christy Wallace, names that rarely trended, but now danced into the box score with purpose. It wasn't just Hull and Mitchell, this was a collective uprising, but Hull, she was the storm. There was a moment late, in the third quarter when she stole a pass at midcourt and sprinted for a layup, a Mystics defender trailing her like a shadow. She didn't flinch. She didn't slow down. She took the contact, absorbed it, and finished the bucket with a grimace, and a scream that shook the rafters. That moment wasn't just a two-point play. It was the emotional peak of a game that had become a battle for respect. The Fever had been told they couldn't win without Clark. They weren't just proving that wrong, they were redefining themselves. And Mitchell, so often overlooked in the era of highlight reel rookies, reminded everyone why she remains one of the most dangerous scorers in the league. Her game spoke in paragraphs, not headlines. Footwork, ball control, patience, timing. She was the perfect counterweight to Hull's firebrand energy. Together, they dismantled the Mystics, slowly, then all at once. And somewhere in the shadows, watching or perhaps just feeling the rumble from afar, Caitlin Clark had to be proud, because this wasn't a team falling apart without her. This was a team rising. In many ways, it might have been the best thing to happen to the Fever. The narrative that they were just a one-star show was shattered. The league had to look again, had to acknowledge that this wasn't just Caitlin's team. It was Lexie's, it was Kelsey's, it was all of theirs. The final buzzer didn't just mark the end of a game, it marked the beginning of a new chapter. The Fever, victorious, didn't celebrate like underdogs who just pulled off a miracle. They walked off the court like a team that knew this was only the beginning. They hadn't just won, they had reclaimed something that had been stolen from them: dignity. And for the Mystics, it was a reckoning. For all the physicality and all the preseason posturing, they had run into something far more dangerous than hype. They ran into belief. The kind of belief that is born not in highlight tapes or press conferences, but in the quiet resolve of players who remember everything and forget nothing. Every push, every elbow, every comment. It had all been banked, stored, and converted into fuel. This was never just a regular season matchup. It was a revenge tour with a detour into redemption. It was what happens when a team gets knocked down in the public eye and decides that staying down isn't an option. It was a reminder that heart doesn't always come in headlines. That sometimes, the best stories aren't the ones everyone's talking about. They're the ones that sneak up behind the noise and roar louder than anyone expected. So yes, Caitlin Clark was missed. Her shooting, her vision, her presence. But the Fever didn't just survive without her. They thrived, they recalibrated, and they showed that this team, far from being a one-player spectacle, is something far more dangerous, a unit. One that fights, one that remembers, one that wins. Now the league must take note, because if the Indiana Fever can do this without their generational talent, what happens when she returns? What happens when Hull, Mitchell, and the rest of the roster merge with the spark Clark brings? It's no longer a question of whether they'll be good. The only question left is how far they can go.